moving on now to our lead story of today. I know that everybody is talking about mandirs and temples today, but we're not. Today we're going to focus on something that I personally believe will have a far greater impact on each of our lives. And it's a matter that shouldn't be ignored. Now consider this. As citizens, we work, we pay taxes, we save and we invest for our retirements with the clear understanding that the money that we earn is a promise that will be kept. Not just this year, but every year after that. Which means that if you earn 100 rupees, that 100 rupees will still be worth 100. That piece of paper that says it has 100 rupees on it will be worth 100. Not just this year, but forever. Now, this is a value that's guaranteed to us by the RBI, or the Reserve Bank of India, an institution that should not be impacted by the politics of the day because it's independent of the government. I'll tell you why. The RBI effectively decides our interest rates on all of our loans. It controls the money supply. It controls the exchange rates. It regulates the financial markets, the banks, and it makes sure that the promise written on the money, the paper, is always kept. Now, it's of utmost importance that the RBI be allowed to do this without interference from government, because government is the biggest spender of money, the biggest borrower of funds in the country, the biggest owner of banks, and the biggest gainer from the financial markets. In any democracy, the people, you and I, need for the judiciary or the courts, the army and the police, and the central bank to always be independent. In our case, the central bank is the RBI. So I want you to consider this. Earlier this year, 4 Supreme Court judges held an unprecedented press conference exposing interference in their functioning. It was followed then by the mess in the CBI that proved that there was interference. That mess is still to be sorted out. And now we have a battle brewing between the RBI and the government that has been exposed. In a speech on Friday, the RBI Deputy Governor Viral Acharya surprised everyone by mentioning Argentina as an example. Now, for those of us who didn't know, in 2010, the Argentinian equivalent of the RBI chief quit his job because he was pushed to make decisions he was not happy with. It sparked off the worst constitutional crisis in the history of Argentina, and it caused its financial markets to collapse. That was a very strong example to give us. Now, the Deputy Governor of the RBI also said this, and I quote, he said, "Governments that do not respect the central bank's independence will sooner or later incur the wrath of the financial markets and ignite an economic fire, and they will come to rue the day they undermined the important regulatory institution." Essentially, it sounds like a dialogue from Game of Thrones. Viral Acharya also confirmed that the idea to talk about the independence of the RBI came from the RBI governor himself, Urjit Patel. So now we've all begun to wonder if there is a rift currently brewing in our system between Urjit Patel and the government of India. It's widely reported that the government and the RBI have been locking horns on interest rates and other policy matters. But let's not forget about demonetization. Actually, I don't think any of us can ever forget about demonetization, where several questions were raised about how the RBI cleared that decision at all, a decision that should have been made by the RBI and not the government to begin with. It is in the interest of every one of us as citizens of this country that the RBI remain independent from the government. Not just this government, but every government in the future. Because without a clear faith and trust and confidence in our central bank, our financial systems will fail. And so will the promise that's written on our currency. And this is not the first time that the question of the RBI's independence has been raised. But the question we are asking tonight is this: are we worse off today for some reason than we ever were before? And is our RBI at risk? Joining me on the show, Mohan Guruswamy is a senior economist who's been advisor to the Finance Minister of India, R. Gopalan, former Secretary, Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Professor Aman Agarwal, Professor of Finance, Dean and Director at the Indian Institute of Finance, Vipin Malik, former Director of the RBI, and Gopal Agarwal for the BJP. I welcome all of you to this conversation and I thank you for giving us your time. I will start with Mr. R. Gopalan. Mr. Gopalan, I'm sure you've read about the problems between the RBI and the governor and the government right now, as well as excerpts of the speech that was made by Mr. Acharya on Friday. Do you believe that we currently have a crisis between the RBI governor and the government of India?
Well, it's a very difficult one-word answer. Tensions have been brewing between government and the RBI over a number of issues in the past, couple of years. You have identified some of them. There were issues relating to February 12 circular, the PNB crisis issue. There was a dividend payment problem that came about. The power sector NPA recognition, how to treat it differently from the government. Then directors on the RBI board, ownership neutrality, and then governor seeking full powers over the public sector banks, then attempt to raid the balance sheet of RBI, and lastly the payment system act. Now, these are all steps which have gone about in the past, few months, which give an indication that RBI is under tremendous tension, and probably I get the feeling that the dialogue which normally takes place, extensive dialogue which normally takes place with the RBI, with the government, probably seems to have not taken place in full measure, in full trust. That's probably the reason why we have had Viral Acharya's his outburst or his exposition or his lecture the other day on Friday. To answer your question, is there a crisis? I would say there is a lot of tension building up and it needs to be doused. I am sure it will be doused, and to that extent I will say that crisis, if one expects, will not be allowed to develop.
All right, Mohan Guruswamy, I will, of course, ask my guests to explain why it's important for us as citizens that the RBI be independent. But my first question to you is, do you believe that at this point it's RBI versus government as well, and Urjit Patel is currently pushing back?
Well, you see, at the best of times, there is always a tension between the government and the RBI. The government is focused on growth and the RBI is focused on inflation. And sometimes, they conflict with each other, the goals. So there is always a tension. Government wants lower interest rates and the RBI wants higher interest rates. So, it goes on. But the RBI has to be independent, autonomous, but it cannot be oblivious of the government. There is a fine relationship, a nuanced relationship, which both sides have to maintain. It's maintained by an elaborate show of respect and concern for each other. But the way in which the government tried to turn the PNB crisis onto the responsibility of the RBI itself showed that this mutual respect and concern for each other's status had gone. The RBI, the way the RBI was treated, the RBI governor was treated at the time of demonetization itself is another indication. So this constant denigration of the RBI by the politicians in the government and in the finance ministry and the bureaucrats close to these politicians causes tension. After all, the RBI has a degree of authority, a certain authority, which has to be maintained.
Well, Gopal Agarwal, here's my question to you, and this is true, what Mr. Mohan Guruswamy just meant. When demonetization happened, the RBI board was given half an hour or cleared it in about half an hour. It was then a hot potato that the RBI governor was left holding. He had to find his way out of it, and we all saw how difficult that job was. When the PNB scam broke out, we had the finance minister come out very clearly saying regulators should have done a better job. The RBI governor then came out and said we don't have enough power to regulate. Is the government interfering with the RBI, Gopal Agarwal?
No, you cannot call this an interference. What we all respect the independence of the RBI. The government also respects. It's the institution. It's a very respected central bank institution which has done a lot of service to the nation. It is doing so much for the country, and it's an important arm and of the government itself. What is governance? Without the monetary policy, there will be no governance, full-fledged governance. So, and RBI is an arm of the whole government,
Yes.
but and its independence is also important. The issue is whenever you are discussing on the economic policies, there are bound to be different options, and when there is a discussion, all discussions cannot, difference of opinion cannot be taken as a critical crisis or interference in itself. And
No,
what I would like to tell you is
Okay.
there are different mandates for RBI and the government, and those mandates have come from the constitution
So
itself.
let me rephrase the question. First of all, I just want to point out that the RBI has the expertise in matters of economic policy.
No,
And
on the monetary policy.
On monetary policy.
Yes.
And if
Economic
there is-
policy is the domain
Yes.
of the government.
And so, if there is a disagreement, like you said, there will be clashes. It is the government's job to convince the experts in the RBI. It is only if you can convince the experts in the RBI that that stand of monetary policy does make sense. But let me rephrase the question. The deputy governor of the RBI made a speech on Friday, and I'm sure you've read it as well. We've all read it, where he has said some very scathing things. He has said that, and I'll say this again, governments that do not respect central bank independence will sooner or later incur the wrath of the financial markets. Do you see this as
No,
regular, ordinary? Is this not out of place for you? Doesn't this indicate that there is a problem?
There is definitely a difference of opinion. There is an issue coming out on several issues. There are issues with regard to preventive corrective action, with regard to issues of inflation. There has been several times inflation is one of the important target for the RBI, but there are difference of opinion with regard to inflation, monetary policy, rate of interest. Government was trying to put down the rate of interest. RBI was sticking to the higher rate of interest because there are different mandates. There are
But you
the
do-
government. No, let me finish.
Yes.
The government has a responsibility of maintaining economics, and government has to look into the fiscal policy. RBI has a limited role of monetary policies, and that monetary policy should integrate with the overall government policies. So I don't think there is a crisis or independence of RBI is being hampered, etc. There are difference of opinion on the issues, and this difference of opinion had been at several levels. Yes, there is a bigger challenge with regard to demonetization. There was a big debate on that time, but ultimately that was handled by the government itself. So these can be sorted
Okay.
out, and I
just want
we
to
should not
clarify a
take
couple
it
of-
over and above what the difference of opinion between the institution also. You will talk to different RBI director, they will have different opinion on
Okay,
it.
so I want to clarify a couple of things. You did say, of course, that monetary policy is with the RBI, but it has to fit into the government's larger fiscal policy.
Economic policy of the country, conditions
The
on the
final
economy.
decision on monetary policy and interest rates and anything else lies purely with the RBI governor, whether or not the finance minister agrees or disagrees with the stand that he is taking. That's what we mean when we say RBI independence, that the finance minister or the government may disagree with the stand he's taking on interest rates, but you cannot dictate a stand and you cannot influence.
Dictate. No, you cannot dictate, but you can debate and discuss. You can
Yes,
show
but,
your difference
no,
of
but
opinion.
if there is-
what
fair enough.
the
Let me
finance
take this to Mr.
secretary has
Gopalan.
also said that there are issues with regard to PCA, but ultimately on PCA and other things,
okay.
the RBI
All right.
will
Let me
say.
bring in the rest of the panel. Mr. Gopalan, I want to take this back to you. There's always been a difference of opinion between government and RBI. But if that difference of opinion results in the deputy governor making the kind of speech he made on Friday, where he also specified that the idea behind this speech came from the RBI governor himself, is it possible that the difference of opinion at this point has gotten worse than it should be? That the situation might slightly be out of hand?
I don't think so. Well, it's clear that there is a difference of opinion. Mr. Viral Acharya's speech would have been seen by the governor. he acknowledges governor's, inputs. But the point also remains that RBI is independent in its monetary policy formulation. Now, government has economic growth in mind and is responsible for the fiscal issues, but if fiscal issues are overdone, obviously monetary policy has to act to ensure that the negative effects of over fiscal spending is taken care of by the monetary policy. So, monetary policy in that sense by RBI is totally independent. Coming to your question, Faye, is it a breakdown situation? I don't think so. I think these kind of tensions had existed even earlier, except that they were discussed across the table. They were discussed not in the public domain, but they came to some kind of solution. In all those cases, I can tell you, most of the times RBI governors, whatever he said on the monetary policy, always carried. Now, we should keep that in mind, and at the same time, what has happened outside now of discussions, speeches outside, and comments made by Finance Ministry, I get the feeling that they could have been avoided. In the past, they have been avoided. In the past, these things have been handled. Now, I do not know what is the present style of speaking outside. I don't know what do we want to achieve by that. I have no idea.
In fact, let me take the question also to Mr. Vipin Malik, former director of the RBI. Comments made by the finance minister range from basically saying that the country is taller than any regulator, and we've seen these public comments, quite rightly, like R. Gopalan said, have been made over the last several months. Demonetization onwards, a lot of this laundry has been aired in public. Mr. Vipin Malik, do you feel, given everything that has been going on, regulators cannot talk to stakeholders? Arun Jaitley, the finance minister, this is a statement that came from him as well. Do you believe that there is a crisis brewing?
Let me say that by start with that there is no blanket independence of the Reserve Bank of India. Reserve Bank of India is guided by the two acts, Reserve Bank of India Act and Banking Regulation Act. Under the Reserve Bank of India Act, the board and the constitution of the board, starting from governor to deputy governors to the directors and all non-official directors, are appointed by the Government of India. Similarly, under the Banking Regulation Act, Section 35 is there. Section 35 says that RBI has to act under the directions of the Central Government of India. Because the last rupee, the rupee which is certified as that which I owe to the Government of India confirms their certification that Government of India owes that payment of that rupee. If you see the rupee, it is written there and signed by the Finance Secretary. That means Government of India is a guarantor. Having said so, what has happened in actual fact is that because of the demonetization and because of the 11 banks going to PCA, which have not been addressed properly, the PCA banks have not been addressed by the Government of India till date. And if you start saying that you start paying to the small SME sector or MSME sector, when you have already put the banks in PCA where they cannot lend, they cannot open branches, or they cannot pay the government, these are contradictory things. So the Government of India, what it should have done is that first you bring all the 11 important banks, large banks from PCA by capitalizing them, number one. Number two, sorry, you said something?
No, I didn't. So
Number
let me just
that you have.
So you believe that the government could have handled the situation better, from what I understand.
Much better, and Mr. Acharya, by referring to that we are as compared to the Argentina, is I do not agree with him. He has gone too extreme, and that is not the job of Mr. Deputy Governor to address like that. The country has been well managed. There has been an oil crisis, but still the government has addressed that properly by devaluing the rupee.
Okay.
So I do not see anything wrong.
Mr. Vipin Malik, when you say the country has been well managed, do you include demonetization and the NPA problem and the PNB scam in your definition of well managed?
Well, so far as demonetization is concerned, to my mind, it was a decision which, in my opinion, was not correct decision, and that should not have been done without deliberations. And so far as banking frauds are concerned, I fully make accountable Reserve Bank of India that they have not properly addressed or inspected the banks, which is their responsibility, and they should be made accountable. So far as demonetization is concerned, what I heard is that half an hour before the cabinet took a decision and the board was there and they endorsed whatever the cabinet decision was. That was totally wrong, and that was totally I mean, there was no working behind that. That could
Right.
have seen.
So
from
Mr.
the
Malik, in
lines
your mind
or
then,
from the
is that an
banking,
RBI that is truly
the whole
independent?
country was put into situation.
Is that an RBI that is truly independent? A board that decides based on what the cabinet has
RBI
told them in half an hour without deliberation?
RBI is not independent. Who says that RBI is independent? I have told you that RBI is not independent, because banking regulation and the RBI Act itself say from the board to the directions of the Reserve Bank of India of the Government of India under Section 35. Who says RBI is independent? RBI is not
Shouldn't
independent
the
at all.
RBI, okay, let me rephrase
I
the
don't
question,
see-
Mr. Malik. If
I
you
mean,
believe
it's
that
not like the
demonetization
Supreme Court
was a
of-
bad
let me say,
decision,
it's not-
shouldn't
it's
it
not
have been the RBI to have stopped that decision? Currency
Very bad
is,
decision.
is in the purview of the RBI.
They should. The very fact they have to issue 74 circulars after demonetization shows that it was not addressed properly. They issued 74 circulars on demonetization. You see, RBI is not like Supreme Court of India or Election Commission of India. They are independent, not the Reserve Bank of India. And nor any country has given that much of liberty to the central banks to run their own banking system. No, all central banks are guided and controlled by the governments, and which is the case here.
So let me
But what
just
happens
rephrase
is,
one second.
whenever
Mr.
there are
Vipin Malik,
strong
forgive me for
governments,
interrupting
like
you,
what
but
it is today,
I'm quoting at this
the
point.
strong governments always can go wrong.
Okay, I'm quoting at this point an article or an essay written by Mr. Y.V. Reddy, former governor of the RBI, who's also been very vocal on the matter of independence. He said the RBI should be independent for consistency, first of all, because successive governments change every 4 years. They cannot maintain consistency in policy. The RBI doesn't go anywhere. The RBI maintains consistency. He also says that successive governments are the political cycles don't match the business cycles. Governments make decisions based on political cycles. When is the next election coming? Has the last election gone well? RBI does not match those cycles. He also says that the reasons and the various areas of independence should be in manning and choosing personnel, which should not be influenced by politics, in capital policy and borrowing, and of course in larger policy statements, which we've seen in these particular areas. The government and the RBI have clashed. The specific cases are the PNB and of course PNB scam of Nirav Modi, and of course demonetization, and there are 10 others that were listed by the Times of India this morning. One more voice on our panel, Professor Aman Agarwal. Professor Agarwal, do you see a problem right now between the RBI governor
Let me
and the government?
In a democracy,
Yes.
in a democracy,
all right. Vipin Malik, go ahead.
In a democracy, it's a government who is accountable, not the Reserve Bank of India. In a democracy, in where there is elections coming on, it is the government which is accountable, and RBI is not elected through the
Fair enough. Absolutely, Mr. Vipin Malik, I understand what you're saying. The government is accountable to the people. The RBI has been appointed. Now, the reason why RBI staff is appointed and not elected is because they are not influenced by elections, and they are able to maintain a policy that is consistent over several years and does not change per election, which is why it's important to have both. So that's my answer to you, but I do want to bring in Professor Aman Agarwal. Professor Agarwal, do you believe we have a problem?
Now, the issue of the central bank and the government being always in a toss, it's been there world over. It's not something which is a new issue, whether it is within the country for the last 30-40 years or it's overseas. We've seen that kind of issues coming up. The important issue before us is that both of them, like the wheels of a car moving together to accelerate and take the economy forward, have to go hand in hand. There can be disturbances, there can be discussions, there can be ideological differences, there can be issues which could be cause of concern, because they have two different parameters as outlined before, which is the fiscal policy and the monetary policy, to be looked upon by both these institutions. I think the important thing is that they go together, they need to discuss on table, sit on table, have conflicts and still go forward. That is important for the country in the long run, and we should not forget that for all long run curves we need to have small short run curves creating those long runs curves. So just to think that it's only a one-day affair or it's a long-term affair, both of them cannot go alone. Just to say that only a long-term measure can work on it, we need to have a complementary role of both the long-term and the short-term to go in forth, and that's where the government typically focuses on the economy and the fiscal issues, and the RBI focuses on the monetary policy. Now, we are going too much into depth in terms of debating on what the Deputy Governor has been saying. I think it's an issue between the government which can be resolved. We have seen that happen in the previous government, we've seen that happen in the previous governments, and I think it's not something which is creating a big problem. Please note that we have fairly good amount of economic robust, we have fairly good amount of deposits with the central bank, we have been able to manage the balance sheet, we've been able to contain the currency crisis which we are going through in terms of falling rupee. So there are measures which both the parties are willing to take at certain cost, for which will be the cost for the nation, as you rightly pointed out at the beginning of the program, which is a cost of the rupee, what will happen to people's money at the end of the day. But not to forget the fact that these are debates which need to be discussed in-house first, then taking on the ground to the public, because they do not deal with people's of day-to-day manner.
Well, I disagree. I understand what you're saying, Professor Agarwal, but I disagree with you when you say that they do not pertain to our day-to-day. I just want to give Gopal Agarwal an opportunity to rebut. I know you had points to make. And then I'm going to open it up to this panel to talk about why ordinary citizens should know what's going on with the RBI and why it's important to us. Mr. Agarwal,
I would take not much time, but I would like to mention 2-3 points. First important thing is independence is for the opinion, and with regard to accountability, their decisions are questionable. It is not that nobody can debate their decisions, everybody can debate. The accountability is not about independence. Accountability has to be there. Second thing is that debate of independence cannot be a ground for supremacy. You cannot say that RBI is not independent, therefore it is supreme, therefore it is not independent. These are not counterproductive. You cannot debate on independence for supremacy of the institution. It has to be part of the overall economic policy of the country. That's very important, and therefore there are issues you have mentioned. There are difference of opinion. I would myself would like to mention there are issues with regard to NPA recognition, currency in circulation, MCP which is controlling the inflation, then system of payment regulator. These are issues where there are difference of opinion, and government is giving every due respect to what the RBI has an opinion on the monetary policy.
Yes, let me rephrase the question, Mr. Agarwal, and this is how I rephrased it for Mr. Vipin Malik also, and he answered that question for me. Now, we understand that the RBI was given half an hour to clear the decision of demonetization after the cabinet made it. Now, the decision to demonetize currency should ideally have should have come from the RBI, because currency is in the sole purview of the RBI, as you said yourself. But it came from the government and the cabinet, and the RBI then cleared it in half an hour. Now, largely agreed that it was a bad decision. It was bad for us. Then 74 circulars to scramble out of the hole that demonetization made for us. In your, let's say, independent opinion, if we were to take off your BJP hat for a second, does that seem like an independent central bank to you?
No, but if there are decisions which you do not agree, or I agree, or somebody else doesn't agree, economics, there are various options where there are difference of opinion. Ultimately, you allocate resources, you take decision based on some opinions. You may be wrong in your opinion, or some may say that the objective is not achieved. One thing I would like to mention is that if you say that the RBI is always correct in a demonetization case, if you take, then why NPA was allowed to build? Was it not independent since our independence? How NPA accumulated to the tune of 12 lakh crores under the nose of the RBI? Who is responsible? So there are issues with regard to decisions.
So you're
we
saying,
cannot say RBI is wrong in that. There are issues
one second,
where you
so
may
what, the
have
demonetization question, your
Yes.
answer is basically the RBI agreed and they were wrong to have agreed.
No, I'm not saying. If you say or anybody say that we do not agree to the decision of demonetization, everybody has a right to take a position or opinion. But all decisions taken by the government, you cannot say that all are perfect and everything has been successful.
No, I don't understand the answer. So you're saying
issue
the
is
RBI
that, no, if you want to discuss on independence of RBI, there are different issues. If you want to discuss on demonetization, I can speak. But then I will tell you Benami Property Act, IBC.
No, that's not my point.
Then
That's not my. So
GST,
you're saying
they will justify the demonetization. You cannot
I'm not
isolate
arguing.
an issue.
All right.
On
let me ask the
demonetization
question.
and talk on independence.
Okay, let me ask the question.
If you want to discuss
Mr.
on
Agarwal,
yeah.
now if you're going to sit in the same studio,
Yeah.
you have to let me speak.
Yes.
Okay. Now my point is, how did the RBI clear this? If not by under pressure from the government, and that proves that the RBI is not independent. But let me take the question now to Mohan Guruswamy, who's also been listening. You've heard all of the arguments, Mr. Guruswamy, and here are the list of trigger points between the RBI and the government. Demonetization being the most important one, in my opinion. They're battling over. I'm sure you did. They're battling over growth and inflation. They're battling over cleanup of NBAs. They're battling over balance sheets of the RBI. The new regulator for payment banks, which the government believes should not be the RBI and should be a different regulator. Easier rules for weak banks at this point. NBFCs and the IL&FS crisis and the cleanup, the liquidity crunch, dollar sales and board appointments. The latest appointment of Mr. Gurumurthy has also been a problem. Now, do you see this as evidence, Mr. Guruswamy, starting from demonetization downwards, that the RBI currently has a problem, and that is why the Deputy Governor had merit in speaking out?
Well, before that, I would like to say that the RBI does not control the banks. It only sends warnings to them, cautionaries. It's the Department of Banking which controls the banks. They control the day-to-day activities, they control the appointments, they control promotions, they control everything. And they are the owners of the bank. And it is their responsibility to see that their banks are behaving responsibly and not give money to all and sundry at the behest of politicians, which is what the banks have been doing traditionally. It's not BJP or Congress. It's been like that for a long time now. This is how the NPAs got piled up. And without the regulatory mechanisms, they kept giving money to power plants, and so they are stuck. If they had listened to the RBI, maybe they wouldn't have been in this position. But there is a tendency for the banking department to operate separately, the finance ministry to operate through the banking department, and then the RBI to be kept out. But the RBI has been isolated by this government in the manner in which this board was treated by the government. They gave them half an hour, they took away the mobile phones, they put them in a room, locked the door up and said, now wait. The Prime Minister got an important announcement to make. And they only rubber stamped it. At that stage, mind you, the previous RBI governor had made some comments about not having demonetization not being particularly good for us at this stage. But this new RBI governor was hustled into it. He was new in the job, he was just a few weeks there, and he didn't know what was happening. Now he is fighting back, he now knows what's happening and what shouldn't be done and what should be done, which is very important. Veil Modi the other day said, the government plays T20 cricket, we pay 5-day tests. And that's a huge statement. That is, this government is playing a short game. That's for tomorrow, for elections and for some game or the other. And the RBI plays a long-term game, which is slow and steady and cautious. But RBI has to act. Now, Raghuram Rajan had told the state governments, you can't give away farm wave loaners. It's not your money. It's our money. It's the bank's money. So unless you make provisions for it, you can't give it. It brings them into conflict with the politicians. Central government announced farm waivers. They say no. Now, so there is always this tension. And you've got to manage this by discussion with the RBI. You cannot give it, put a gun at his head and say, do it or we'll lock you up in a room. Now, that is not the way to behave with the RBI, and I think there's a problem here about the way this government has behaved with the RBI, the way this finance minister talks about the RBI. He holds them responsible for Punjab National Bank. Then who was smoozing with whom in Davos? And who was calling somebody Bhaiya in front of all the banking community? So these things do count. And the government has to be sensitive to this, which is why RBI governors, to the extent I saw, were always accorded a great deal of respect. You know, the finance minister would not see him on his table, but would receive him at the sofa, where they would sit side by side and talk. Now that is the kind of relationship which you should have with the RBI governor. You got to meet with his approval. He is the man who, you know, will give you past strictures and will tell you what to do and what not to do. And you got to treat him as that, as somebody who has more information, has better information at best of times. So I think there is a problem.
Yes.
And I think this problem of temperament, Mr. Jaitley tends to be a lawyer, wants to score debating points, you know, whereas actually you should be looking at things entirely different. You don't score debating points with institutions. You work with them.
Well, I have this question to ask the panel. Now, in this year, we've seen the Supreme Court come out and talk about its problems of independence. We've seen what has played out with the CBI. We've seen the IB get involved. We see the RAW get involved in the FIR that has been filed in the CBI. And now we're talking about the RBI. Are our institutions under threat? Is this something we should be worried about, because there is a pattern developing? Mr. Guruswamy, I saw your hand go up, and then I'll give you an opportunity to respond. Mr. Guruswamy, go ahead.
Yeah, very clearly there is a huge problem. Look at the way the CBI was treated the other day. It was ringed by constables and inspectors of the IB. Everybody was locked in. CBI chief was asked to go when the government it has to be done through the CVC. And, you know, to prevent the CBI, you know, and who put these officers in? When the director of the CBI didn't want a particular officer, the government insisted on it. And you can't do that with institutions. CBI is meant to be independent, meant to always also keep a watch on the government. Because malfeasances take place in government, corruption takes place in government. It's the CBI's job to look at it. You can't tamper with it, you can't meddle around with it, and they meddle with it. You also do it with other institutions. You do it and you say that, you know, I have the mandate to do these things. Today, you saw the minister, the cabinet saying he doesn't agree with the Supreme Court's decision, and he says, you know, they will have to pay a high price for it. Now, how can you be in the government and say such things?
Absolutely.
Veeraj Singh said that.
I just want to point out one more piece of information.
Is the government reprimanded him?
Yes.
You know, nothing. So all institutions are under assault.
I just want to point out another piece of information, which is when that 5 p.m. meeting happened on the 8th of November, apparently there were 10 vacancies on the RBI board. And this is another, point that the various institutions have complained about. The Supreme Court, for example, has talked about how judges don't get appointed on time, and that is also a handle of pressure. But Gopal Agarwal wanted to respond. Please go ahead, Mr. Agarwal.
I would like to tell is that how do you define independence? You define independence by giving them institutions to develop, sort out their differences themselves. You don't preempt. You see, you are talking of judiciary. There is a big difference between the appointment of judges through collegium or the process of even the parliament had passed that bill, but the Supreme Court rejected. What the government did, said that we have a difference of opinion with the judiciary, but where the crisis developed, the government led the resolution into that institution, and now that has been resolved. This is the way government takes decision. If you want, the government should preempt, interfere into decision.
I'll tell you what I want.
Whoever are telling this, that why they want the government to interfere into the differences between if you are talking of CBI, there is a difference between the two officers.
Let me tell you something, Mr. Gopal Agarwal. No, one second. Let me make my argument clear. You said, if you want the government to do this, I'll tell you what I don't want. As a citizen of this country, I don't want 4 judges of the Supreme Court. Now the current sitting CJI, included 4 judges of the Supreme Court, holding an unprecedented press conference talking about the fact that their methods in the Supreme Court functioning are currently being interfered with. I don't want to wake up in the morning and read in the paper or watch on television that the CBI headquarters is being raided by the CBI. That the CBI officer number 1, number 2 and number 3 are facing corruption charges at this point. That the IB, which is the Intelligence Bureau, which should be collecting intelligence for national security and other purposes, is currently been caught snooping outside the CBI number 1's house. This basically points to political interference. I don't want the Deputy Governor of the RBI making a speech using Argentina as an example, because my life savings are in my PF that I will not get for another 20 years. I want the RBI to be independent so that political decisions don't affect my PF and don't affect my earnings and don't affect my life savings. So that is what I want.
I also want that ideal situation, but is that ideal situation has developed over the years in the country? All institutions, there are problems.
Why has it all happened this year?
No, I tell you,
Why is it happening this
every
year?
time there was big difference between the RBI and government several times.
Mr.
I
Vipin
tell you,
Malik.
let me finish.
Okay, let's
The
finish and
issue
then
is
Mr. Vipin Malik.
that when you talk of NPA, you forget that there was inefficiency in the management. Where this account happened, how this happened, and even if you in the court, still we have differences with regard to appointment. But how do you if you want an ideal situation, nothing to come out there, that cannot happen in a democracy. In the democracy, various institutions balance each other. CBI will have a difference. If the government will not take sides with anybody in CVC, and judicial process has been involved
We'll allow Vipin Malik.
settling this.
Vipin Malik has a point
just
to make.
10 more seconds. The issue is, this is the way democracy functions,
please.
and independence is defined the way
Vipin Malik, I'm running out
it
of
is
time.
being done.
Vipin Malik,
No
please.
preempting by the government.
Vipin Malik, please go ahead.
Can I? You see, I think Mr. Acharya has preempted something. And what preemption is that there is likely to be a cash shortage of over 1 lakh crores. And that cash shortage in this festival season is going to defame the government. And also the government and the Reserve Bank has started playing to both, that who is defaming whom. So that is very important. It's a very Acharya statement at this stage. Saying all this, to me, has a lot of meaning. It's basically a cash shortage, and 11 banks not coming out of the PCA. So you will see the election in the election year, things will go further bad and bad and bad.
That's actually a scary picture to play.
No, I don't think.
One second.
we don't
Mr. Gopalan hasn't spoken for a while. He's
Yeah.
been listening very patiently. Mr. Gopalan, what is your reaction to what Mr. Malik just said, that there will be a cash shortage, and this perhaps was a preemption of that cash shortage?
I do not agree. I get the impression that this is an ongoing tension which is going on. Probably came out for the simple reason that the levels of tolerance among both the institutions was going down significantly, and that's the reason why people started talking outside.
Mr. Gopalan.
As far as the liquidity issue is concerned, it's an issue today. Yeah.
Mr.
Yeah,
Gopalan,
you said
the
something.
question, I mean, if tensions were rising,
you
and
said-
depending on what everybody has said, the RBI and the government of India have always had some friction. Why did it reach the point where patience wore thin and someone actually came out and spoke in public?
As I told you, Faye, it's a question of levels of tolerance having gone down significantly on both sides. Still, these issues could have been discussed and debated across the table. Somehow, the levels of tolerance on both the sides has gone down significantly, and that's the reason why we see this in the public arena. But on the question of liquidity is a problem, but there have always been problems of liquidity all through, and there has been management of liquidity through OMOs, through various other lines of credit, and those kind of things are
so
always
you don't buy the liquidity
available in
argument.
the hands of RBI to infuse liquidity.
All right. All right, I've run out of time. I've run out of time, Mr. Gopalan. Unfortunately, I've run out of time. But this is obviously a conversation that I believe we should have more often, because while it stays in the purview of business news channels, this, I personally believe, affects each and every one of us. It just boils down to this. We go to work every day. We earn, we save, we pay our taxes because we believe in the value of the money that we're working for. And that value is looked after by the RBI. So, and I'm not getting into whether or not the RBI is independent or not, but if the RBI themselves, the leaders in the RBI, the governor, the deputy governor, are coming out and saying things like this and talking about how they are not independent, that's reason for me to worry. And I think that's reason for all of us to pay closer attention to this problem and talk about it more often. The CBI, the Supreme Court, the IB, RAW and the RBI, these are organizations that need to stay independent in order for us to continue to have a democracy. Because while we vote a government into power, there are appointed bodies like this to keep everybody in check. That's what watchdogs are for. You cannot turn watchdogs into lapdogs. That's when democracy begins to crumble. Thanks for watching.